I was not meant to find the photograph. That's what I've told myself in the years since, though I know that's not true. I was meant to. Things like this, objects that feel almost aware of being found, don't simply appear by chance. They wait. It began in the summer of 1998, when I was hired by the Nottingham Historical Archive to assist with the cataloguing of a private estate, one of those sprawling Georgian houses that had been left to rot after the last of the family line died out. The property was called Rosefield House, though the name had long since outlived its scent. The garden was a wilderness of nettles and fractured statuary, the windows filmed with dust so thick they reflected more of the sky than they revealed of the rooms inside. Most of the items I handled that month were routine: birth ledgers, tax forms, letters browned with mildew. But one afternoon, in the attic, beneath a disintegrating chest of women's clothing, I found a smaller box, wrapped in newspaper dated April 1921. I remember the weight of it, not heavy, but resistant, as though something inside had learned to resent being touched. When I peeled away the paper, a strong smell of iron and dust filled the air. Inside was a photograph in a simple wooden frame, its glass uncracked, though dulled by years of neglect. The image was monochrome, a formal family portrait typical of its time. A man and woman sat in a parlor of patterned wallpaper with lace curtains drawn behind them. 3 children stood between and beside them, stiff as mannequins. Another boy and girl, slightly older, stood at the back. The father looked stern, his hand gripping the armrest of a chair like a soldier holding formation. The mother's face was round but tired, as though she had spent a lifetime smiling for others and had forgotten how to do it for herself. It was the kind of photograph meant for mantels and family albums, a proud record of domestic perfection. But the longer I looked, the less perfect it seemed. The first unease came from the children. Their posture was unnaturally rigid, even for a 1920s exposure. The youngest girl, maybe 4 or 5, had her tiny hands clenched at her sides as though trying not to tremble. Her older brother's eyes, almost white from the flash, stared not at the camera, but slightly off to the left, as though something behind it had caught his attention. And then there was the curtain. It hung between 2 windows, the lace pattern intricate and symmetrical, except for one spot near the right edge, where the fabric bulged outward ever so slightly, as though pressed from behind. I almost didn't notice the face. When I did, my stomach turned cold. There, peeking from between the folds, was the partial visage of a man. Half in shadow, one eye visible, staring straight into the camera lens. I stepped back from the frame. For a long time, I simply stood there, the silence of the attic wrapping around me like a physical thing. I tried to explain it rationally. Perhaps one of the family members had stepped behind the curtain as a joke, unaware they were captured in the exposure. Yet the composition was too deliberate, the placement too exact. The figure behind the lace was not accidental. It was posed. I brought the photograph down to the temporary office we had set up in the drawing room. The late afternoon light came through the cracked windows, casting streaks of gold across the dust. I placed the picture under a lamp and examined the back. In fading black ink, a date and name were scrawled. Whitcomb Family, March 1921. Barker and Sons Photographic, Queen's Road. The surname was familiar. In another box from the same estate, I had already seen correspondence addressed to an Arthur Whitcomb solicitor. A few bills, a ledger, a draft of an unfiled will. That evening, I stayed later than I should have. I had the photograph scanned on the archive's flatbed unit, a clunky machine from the 80s that wheezed and clicked as it worked. The resulting digital image filled my monitor. The details were sharper now. You could see the gleam of the brass locket around the mother's neck, the pattern of the wallpaper, the faint blur of movement in the children's feet. But when I zoomed in on the curtain, my throat tightened. The face wasn't a trick of shadow. It had texture, shape. a human density that the rest of the photograph lacked. The eye, pale, watchful, caught the flash perfectly, like an animal's caught in torchlight. I could make out the faint ridge of a cheekbone, the suggestion of parted lips. The photo seemed to breathe. I told myself I was tired, that the attic dust had gotten to me. But when I printed a high-resolution copy, I noticed something new, the faintest ripple along the lace itself, as though the curtain had been moving at the moment of exposure. And behind that movement, darker lines hinted at something else, something deeper than cloth. The next morning, I asked the estate executor, an elderly man named Latham, whether the Whitcombs had any living relatives. He shook his head. "Died out long ago," he said. "Tragic family. House never quite right after the fire." "Fire?" I asked. He frowned. "Yes, early 20s, I think. The papers said the upper floor caught light from a candle. No one found. No bodies. Just soot and silence. Terrible business. That was the first time I felt it. That peculiar vertigo that comes when coincidence starts to look like design." I returned to the photograph, now sitting on my desk, and stared at it until the sun fell below the windowsill. I told myself it was just an artifact of exposure, but deep down, I already knew it wasn't. In the following days, I learned more about the Whitcombs. According to property records, Arthur and Margaret Whitcomb purchased Rosefield House in 1919. He was a solicitor, she a known patron of local charities. They had 4 children: Edward, Charlotte, Henry, and Louisa. 2 boys, 2 girls, the perfect symmetry of an English family rebuilding itself after war. But the war had already taken something from Arthur. He'd returned from France with a limp and a 1,000-yard stare, the kind that doesn't vanish with medals or homecomings. A letter from a colleague described him as diligent, humorless, prone to long silences. Margaret, in contrast, was remembered for her warmth. In church bulletins from 1920, her name appeared beside donation lists for widows and war orphans. And yet, in her diary, found among the estate boxes, there was a different voice entirely. January 5th. He wakes again at 3. The same sound. Says it's the wind. But the curtains are still when I check. February 12th. Charlotte says she saw someone standing in the corner of the nursery. Her brother told her not to speak of it. I think he sees it too. March 3rd. He insists we take the portrait before Easter. Says it will put the house in order. He means something else. I can feel it. That last line unsettled me the most. She knew something. She feared it. And she understood that the photograph was meant to do more than commemorate. It was meant to contain. The studio itself, Barker and Sons Photographic, had closed decades earlier. Its building was now a bakery that smelled perpetually of yeast and sugar. I visited it one rainy afternoon, hoping for some trace of the photographer. The shop owner, an old man polishing the counter, smiled when I asked. "Albert Barker," he said. "My grandfather worked for him, back when this was still a studio. He kept ledgers, somewhere in the cellar." He disappeared through a trapdoor behind the counter and returned with a weathered account book bound in cracked leather. The pages, though faded, were legible. Each entry listed a name, a date, and a short note about the sitting. There it was, Whitcomb family, March 1921. Beside it, a faint line written in smaller script. Session incomplete, exposure delayed due to incident. I asked what that might mean. The man shrugged. Could be anything. Plate malfunction, child fainting, flashbulb bursting. Happened often back then, but it didn't sit right with me. The longer exposure, the dimmer lighting, the ripple in the curtain, all of it suggested something deliberate, something captured that shouldn't have been. That night, I dreamed of the photograph. The family stood just as before, frozen in their formal poses. Only this time, they were breathing. The lace curtain behind them moved faintly, a pulse of air where there should be none. Then, slowly, a shape began to push through the fabric, a man's face emerging from the weave of threads like something being born from darkness. I woke up gasping, my throat dry, the room unbearably still. The next morning, I found the photograph on the floor. I was certain I'd left it inside a storage drawer, yet there it was, face up by the leg of my desk. A fine layer of dust clung to the glass, except for two oval patches, faint and fogged, like breath marks. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I began to dig deeper. According to parish archives, Arthur Whitcomb died in June 1921, accidental gunshot while cleaning his rifle. The record was brief, the handwriting hurried. A month later, Margaret Whitcomb was admitted to the Norwich Asylum. Her intake form included a single line from the physician. Patient suffers from fixed delusion. Claims her reflection is not her own. Her children, the file noted, were sent to relatives in Kent. All four perished during the Blitz. The asylum photograph of Margaret, grainy, overexposed, showed her seated on a bench, head turned slightly to the side. Her gaze wasn't toward the camera, but just over the photographer's shoulder, as though listening. When I compared it to the face behind the curtain, the resemblance was chilling. Same jawline, same shape of the eye. And yet, Margaret was the one sitting in the chair in front of the curtain. So whose face was behind it? I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, pareidolia, the mind's tendency to invent faces in random patterns. But that explanation dissolved when I received the scanned negatives from a colleague at the Nottingham Archive. She had digitized several other prints from the same Barker and Sons session, and though the poses were nearly identical, each print showed the curtain slightly differently. In one, the lace hung flat. In another, it bulged inward. In a third, the outline of the face had shifted, closer to the family. No exposure error could explain that. The following week, I travelled to the ruins of Rosefield House. The estate had long since been reclaimed by ivy and silence. Only the lower walls and fragments of the chimney remained, blackened by fire. The air smelled faintly of ash, though the blaze had burned a century before. As I walked the perimeter, I noticed something odd near the remains of what must have been the study. A depression in the soil, rectangular, like the outline of a box. I knelt, brushing aside the leaves. A glint of rust caught the sunlight. Metal. I dug with my hands until I uncovered a small tin container, its hinges fused by time. Inside were scraps of paper, burned around the edges, and something metallic, coiled and fine. Wire. Later analysis confirmed it was copper, wound by hand in a pattern similar to early sound recording experiments. Primitive magnetic wire. Someone, Arthur, I assumed, had been trying to record. I brought the fragments to a technician at the university. He laughed when I explained, but curiosity won. We cleaned the wire and attempted to read any residual imprint. There was sound, barely perceptible, but it existed. 4 seconds of static, followed by a woman's voice, fragile and pleading. "Arthur, stop." Then a pause, and then a breath, soft, deliberate. That breath haunted me more than any words could. When I returned home that night, I found the photograph waiting on my kitchen table. I hadn't taken it there. My flat door was still locked from the inside. This time, the face behind the curtain was clearer. He wasn't just watching anymore. He was smiling. The day after the wire recording was decoded, I stopped sleeping. It wasn't fear exactly, not at first, but a creeping fascination that burned in me like fever. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the family from that photograph standing perfectly still in their paper world, their eyes fixed on the camera, their expressions patient, almost expectant. It was the expectation that frightened me. I took the photograph to the lab again. By now, it had become my private obsession. I wasn't supposed to handle it outside of the archive, but I told myself it was for research. The technicians humored me as I requested another high-resolution scan, the kind that caught every imperfection in the film grain. As the scanner light passed over the image, I held my breath. When the image appeared on screen, something had changed. The man behind the curtain, the one whose half-face had haunted me since the attic, had moved. His head was tilted farther out now, his expression more defined. The shadow of lace fell across his cheek like a net. And where before there had only been his single visible eye, I could now see the faint suggestion of another, just beneath the edge of fabric, as if he were slowly stepping forward into view. The rest of the photograph remained the same. The father's rigid hand on the chair arm, the mother's weary composure, the children's tight, unnatural smiles. But the air around them, even in grayscale, felt heavier, thicker. I asked the technician if she'd adjusted the contrast. She shook her head. No, this is straight from the scan. Same exposure, same settings as last time. She leaned closer to the monitor, frowning. Looks almost like a double print developing underneath. But that can't happen without chemical interference. That night, when I walked home, I couldn't stop glancing at the dark windows of the houses I passed. Behind one, a curtain stirred. I told myself it was just the wind, but the part of me that had stared too long into that photograph whispered otherwise. I began combing through the diaries of Dr. Helen Reeves, the historian who'd vanished years earlier after publishing her paper on the Whitcomb family. Her notes had been recovered by the university and donated to the archive after her disappearance. I'd read them before, but only superficially. Now they felt like a roadmap. One entry, written in pencil and underlined twice, caught my eye. Heard the voice again. Same words, same tone. 4 seconds exactly. Tried replaying backward. Sounds like laughter. Another, written a few days later. The emulsion on the Whitcomb plate is not inert. It reacts to light even now. Tested under red lamp. The woman's mouth moved. I closed the notebook and sat there in silence. Helen had been hearing the recording before she vanished. The same 4 seconds I'd heard in the lab. The plea, the breath. And she'd been experimenting with the photo. I shouldn't have followed her path, but curiosity is a kind of gravity. You can't escape it once you've stepped too close. That weekend, I set up my own red lamp in the archive darkroom. I placed the photograph on the table, removed the frame, and exposed it for 30 seconds to the soft crimson light. The air smelled faintly of developer fluid, metallic and sour. At first, nothing happened. Then, as I leaned closer, I saw a faint shimmer across the surface of the image, like heat rising from asphalt. The figures seemed to ripple slightly, though my hands were still. The youngest child's eyes glinted, reflecting light that shouldn't have been there. And then I saw it. The lace curtain behind them fluttered. Not on the photograph's surface, but within it. As though the image itself were a window, and something behind that curtain had just moved. I stepped back so fast I nearly knocked over the lamp. My pulse hammered in my throat. I tried to tell myself it was an illusion, the brain's reaction to flickering red light. But when I turned off the lamp and the room went dark, I heard it. A soft exhalation, like someone breathing behind me. When I turned around, there was nothing. But the curtain that separated the darkroom from the hallway swayed gently, as though something unseen had brushed past it. After that night, I stopped bringing the photograph to the lab. I kept it in my flat, locked in a desk drawer. Still, the smell of smoke and old chemicals clung to my clothes. I started dreaming again, not of the family, but of Rosefield House. In the dream, I walked through the rooms, each one preserved exactly as it must have been in 1921. The wallpaper was vivid, the air heavy with the scent of polish and coal. I'd find myself in the parlor, the same one in the photograph. The family stood waiting, motionless. The father's eyes followed me wherever I moved. The mother's lips trembled slightly, as though wanting to speak. And from behind the curtain came the sound of breathing, slow, patient, too human to belong to wind. When I woke, the photograph was always on my bedside table, face up. I told no one. Who could I tell? Colleagues would have dismissed me as unwell, and perhaps they would have been right. But obsession has its own logic, and I needed to know. So I returned to Rosefield House. The ruins looked smaller in daylight, half swallowed by ivy. Only the brick skeleton of the parlor remained intact. I found the spot where the photograph must have been taken, the place where the curtain had once hung. The window there was long gone, leaving only a gash of light through which the breeze whispered. The ground beneath was uneven, packed hard with decades of soil and moss. Something compelled me to dig. I used a trowel at first, then my hands when the earth softened. After an hour, my fingers struck wood. It was another box. Tin, rusted through but still sealed. Inside were several things: a small brass key, a fragment of torn lace, and a notebook, its pages brittle with age but legible. The handwriting matched Margaret Whitcomb's diary entries. May 15th. He says the voice answered again. It asked for light. He wants me to sit for another picture. I told him no. He said it's the only way to bring her back. May 17th. He's been digging at night behind the shed. I saw the ground disturbed. He says he hears breathing in the curtains now. June 1st. I dreamed of the parlor. She was there, behind the lace. I could see her hand pressed against the fabric. When I woke, the curtains were moving though the window was closed. The last entry was dated June 21st, 1921. He says tomorrow we will be together again. I don't think he means alive. That was the day before the fire. I remember standing in the ruins, the notebook trembling in my hands, the air heavy and still. Then a shadow crossed the patch of light that spilled through the window. I froze. There was no sound of footsteps, only the faintest movement of air. I turned, expecting to see someone, anyone. No one was there. But the remains of the wall where the lace curtain had once hung shifted. The vines rustled, though the wind had stopped. I took a step closer, and then I saw it. A length of fabric, half buried in the soil, caught on a splinter of wood. I tugged it free. It was lace, blackened by soot, but unmistakable. The curtain. I ran. When I returned to the archive that night, I sealed both the lace and the photograph inside a protective envelope. I should have destroyed them. But something in me, something irrational, whispered that destruction would not erase them, only anger them. 2 days later, the lab assistant called me. "You might want to see this," she said. She'd run another spectral analysis on the original scan file. "It's strange," she said. "Every digital copy we make deteriorates, as though the pixels are rearranging themselves, but the original remains perfect, untouched." She paused. "Except for one thing." She turned the monitor toward me. The curtain in the image was now open wider, and the man's face, once half hidden, was fully visible. He looked exactly like Arthur Whitcomb. That night, I played the recovered wire recording again. The same voice, the same 4 seconds. "Arthur, stop!" Breath. But this time, there was something after the breath. A whisper, barely audible. But I heard it. "He's still here." The voice wasn't Margaret's anymore. It was Helen Reeves. I don't remember much of the days that followed. Time blurred. I kept the photograph wrapped and hidden, yet I could feel its presence, like static in the air, humming faintly. The curtains in my flat began to stir at odd hours, even when the windows were shut. Once, I woke to find one of them drawn completely back, the night outside pressing against the glass like a face. By the end of that week, I knew what I had to do. I took the photograph, the lace and the notebook back to Rosefield House. It was late, close to midnight. The ruins were darker than I'd ever seen them. The moonlight pooled faintly in the shell of the parlor. I knelt where I'd found the box, set everything down and struck a match. The flame trembled. For a moment I thought it would go out. Then the paper caught. As the fire spread, I heard it, a soft sigh, like relief. The curtain fragment curled inward, blackening. The photograph surface blistered and cracked. I felt the heat against my face, smelled the acrid tang of burning lacquer. And then, in the shifting orange light, I saw movement. Not in the flames, but beyond them. A family, standing perfectly still. The father in his chair, the mother with her tired smile. The children poised between them, their eyes wide, glinting. And behind them, the man from the curtain, stepping forward into the light. I remember nothing after that. They told me later that a groundskeeper found me unconscious near the ruins at dawn. The soil around me was scorched, but nothing else had burned. The photograph and lace were gone. My clothes smelled faintly of smoke. I resigned from the archive soon after. I told myself I was done with history, that I would live quietly, far from old houses and older photographs. But sometimes, late at night, I hear it again. That whisper of cloth moving in still air. And once, while cleaning my shelves, I found something that shouldn't have been there. A small, soot-blackened strip of lace, folded neatly between two books. I threw it away. Or I thought I did. Because this morning, when I drew my curtains open, the light caught something in the window pane. A reflection that shouldn't exist. Behind my shoulder, in the glass, I saw them. A man, a woman, 4 children, standing proudly in a parlor that hasn't existed in 100 years. And between them, the lace swayed as though moved by breath.